Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Open Security Summit. We are joined by Manuel and Mario for the much anticipated Team Topology introduction session. I have been looking forward to this one. If you're not familiar with the Open Security Summit, it is a very collaborative environment. We do expect you to join in the discussion, ask questions, and contribute to the content. And please feel free to unmute yourselves during the session. But if you don't want to unmute yourself, I will be monitoring the chat window as well, and I will be voicing your questions. But if it is really better if you voice them with your voice. It's much better, always. Anyway, the sessions are all recorded, and they will all be on our YouTube channel and also our website for each session. And yes, be involved. OSS 2020 is our hashtag this year, so please feel free to share it all over the social media. These are ways to how join the session. You can, once you register on Hey Summit, you can join from Hey Summit, but the Hey Summit links become available until the last 3 minutes or so. So if you want to join before that, you can do so from our website. As you might have seen on the website, we do have lots of sessions. We have 96 sessions in 1 week, so it's going to be a busy week. And you probably need to spend some more weeks just to listen to the replays. We have lots of tracks, lots of sessions, and we start every day with 10:30 keynote and we finish at 10 p.m. Really full on. And as you can see, there are multiple sessions happening at any time. So yeah, there are 2 more sessions happening at this time. But you chose to be here, so thank you. Yep, openness, as we said, everything gets recorded. There's no stupid ideas, there's no stupid questions, just share them openly. This is how we contribute to this community and take the whole industry forward by generating these ideas and discussing them. Yep. So we will use the chat window of Zoom, as well as you can, if there are any, when the organizers ask questions, you can also use the yes/no buttons in the participants window as well. We will have a note taker. We will be taking notes. One of our organizers has stepped up to be the note taker. And I will be alerting in the last 15 minutes of the session just to focus on the outcomes document. If there is anything that we want to definitely put in there, we will put them during the session, and we will record it up to 5-minute debrief towards the end of the session, so that those videos will be cut out and made into debriefs for each session, so that people can watch those videos first to understand what the content of the session was and decide whether they want to dive deeper or not. Because as I said, there will be 96 sessions, and I can't really expect anyone to go through them all of them. Yep, we have covered all these participation, and these are our values. We are very sensitive about diversity. Our community is quite diverse. You will see people from all different backgrounds and all different races, genders. We all need each other, so yes, and I will be sharing our links in the chat window in a minute for all our for YouTube and Slack and our website. Thank you, and that is from me. Over to you, Manuel and Mario.
Thank you, Didar. Hi, everyone. Hi, Mario. We've talked on Twitter, but we never actually had even a Zoom call, so it's kind of funny to be sharing the session with Mario, but we've shared some interesting ideas. Let me share my screen. So essentially, the idea for this session is for, I'll try to keep my talk rather short as much as possible. I'll give you a brief overview about team topologies and how this applies to security from a kind of high level point of view. I'm not a security expert by any means. And then Mario will give also a short presentation around some of the roles in security compliance and how this how can we make use of team topologies to improve our ways of working, if I'm correct, Mario, in general, and then have plenty of time to have some breakout rooms and discuss, how can we apply these ideas in security. And if you want to add anything, Mario.
No, that was it. So we'll be looking then at the different interaction modes and team topologies that exist, and also considering not just why the interaction of the business towards security teams, but also how we organize ourselves within the different teams that usually make up the CISO function. So the idea will be to then, based on some patterns that I'm going to be suggesting, but it's up for everyone to agree what types of patterns you'd like to explore, for us to go into breakout rooms and try to apply some of these concepts either to our organizations or to some generic patterns that we see in the industry with regards to how security is usually made up.
Okay, so I'll get started then. Hope everyone can see my screen. So we're talking about team topologies for security in general. Very quickly, as I said, I don't have a security background at all. So I'm sure you'll find a lot of gaps, mistakes in my slides. So that's totally normal. I do have some experience around continuous delivery and integrating security tools in deployment pipelines and things like this. And I'm the co-author of the book Team Topologies, which is the topic for this session. And this talk, I presented this talk last year at the All Day DevOps online conference as well. And I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that there are many surveys and data around how many, kind of the rate of security focused people in an organization compared to, total amount of engineers or developers and everyone else in the organization. And so it tends to be, or kind of a number that has been found is 1 to 100, right? So a couple of years ago, I wrote this article about, what does that mean in terms of how do we think about teams and how do we think about the relationship between security teams and development teams, if you like, because that kind of ratio 1 to 100, it's quite challenging, right? Even the ratio that has been found of devs to ops is 1 ops for 10 devs, and that still seems often kind of less than what we should be looking at. And so here we're talking about 10 times less ratio. So it's, hopefully the situation is improving. These numbers are not fixed, of course, but it kind of gives us an idea that there's still a long way until we have kind of more ingrained security practices and thinking in many organizations. At least that's how I see it from a kind of more external point of view. And so perhaps, or clearly just thinking about kind of scaling and getting more security people in the organization is probably not going to be an easy solution. On the other hand, kind of the amount and the range and of topics and practices and things that security teams kind of in the general term have to worry about is enormous, right? So I took this cloud from that source. So I'm sure you have a better cloud, but basically there's so much that you have to think about when you're kind of considering information security and security in general. And so when we talk about things like DevSecOps and shifting security left, what do we really mean? So if we have this, bear with me and consider that this is the whole security, the whole of security concerns in an organization. How do we kind of shift this left to more of the product teams take on more of these responsibilities? I mean, obviously, it's not just kind of splitting in half, right? That's not going to work, obviously. So it's actually, how when you think about it, and what I've seen is actually starting to have product teams or application teams, however you call them, start to take more responsibility for some of the aspects and some of the practices of security, right? So some of those things might include, things like this, vulnerability scanning, secrets management, all this kind of more, I'm guessing for most of you, kind of basic security practices. And so, that's a starting point, and kind of in general, we could think of obviously OWASP top 10 as, at least this should be kind of a minimum that we would expect teams to be looking at, product teams. And the way we've done this so far is kind of thinking about our deployment pipelines and adding, some security tools and some security tests in the pipeline, which is good. I mean, it's a starting point to have kind of automated security checks as much as possible, looking at secure coding guidelines and integrating security in the pipelines. So this is actually from an article I co-wrote with Matthew Skelton a few years ago. So it's nothing really new. We'd expect every application team to at least be doing this today, but there's a lot more, as you know. So a few months ago, Patrick Dubois, who coined the term DevOps and started the DevOps Days conferences, and now he's more involved with DevSecOps. He's working as DevOps advocate for SNCC, the company SNCC. So he was asking about, what are good examples of improving collaboration between teams to improve things. So if we take a step further, not just thinking about the tools, but actually how do we get the interactions and teams to work better together in this kind of DevSecOps approach. So the book, and I co-wrote with Matthew Skelton, Team Topologies, it's not specific to security, it's not specific to any kind of domain within IT, but we're talking about different ways we can organize our teams, kind of topologies of teams, and the ways that they can be interacting in order to promote fast flow. So we know that most organizations today, if not all, have strong competition. The kind of current pandemic kind of in some ways accelerated this need to be able to deliver and change very quickly. So this is not new that there is this drive to be able to adapt quickly. So we're talking about how can we set up the teams, not just to fit their current needs, but that they are by themselves able to understand how they need to evolve and become kind of more of a living organism rather than focus on some static team models. So one of the things we talk about are stream-aligned teams. So if you think about kind of the idea of a cross-functional product team, at least for us, that means a team that has ownership of the end-to-end life cycle of their application or the service they're responsible for. So, in DevOps, talk about build and run teams that can develop and test and deploy and support their own applications and services, and this helps get fast feedback into the life cycle. And so in this kind of team, you'd expect them to have also awareness of what are the security practices to ensure that what they are delivering meets some set of security criteria. So we call this stream-aligned team just because product is kind of overloaded term. And sometimes you have streams of work inside the organization which are not exactly about a product. So it's kind of a more general term, but what we expect, the way that this team behaves is similar. And so if we expect this team, so, if they are going to need a lot of skills, not just development, operations, testing, but also security. So how do we expect a team, which normally has a limit of 7 ± 2 people, to gain all those skills, to have all those skills, if we don't help them, essentially, if we just let them to their own devices and say, well, you are now responsible and you need to sort it out, how you're going to do all this stuff. And obviously, when we do that, one of the areas that's typically kind of left behind is security. Most or many people, at least in my experience in this type of teams, don't have kind of a strong security background or much exposure to those practices. So that's typically going to be left behind. So what we're talking about in team topology is how do we set up other teams, other topologies that can help address this issue. So one of those topologies are enabling teams. These are essentially typically a team of experts on some domain. It doesn't need to be a big team, it can be a small team of experts in a domain, which can be anything. It can be security, which is what we're talking about today, but it can be things like UX or product development or test automation, continuous delivery. There are many domains where we can set up a team of experts that is going to enable the other teams, enable the development teams or streamline teams, as we call them, to bridge those gaps, to help them learn this knowledge and these capabilities. So they kind of orbit around those streamlined teams. So in the case of security, we would be thinking about a team of security experts to detect the gaps in the streamlined teams and help address them, help facilitate the knowledge, help them gain at least, the people in the streamlined teams are not going to become experts, but at least that they have sufficient knowledge to perform, most of the common tasks and security practices. So again, thinking of OWASP top 10 at least, that they understand what that is and what they need to do about it. And so one of the things we're trying to do is reduce dependencies on security experts. So remember, if we want fast flow, we want teams that have more autonomy, but also have competences. And we want them to have less dependencies on other teams to do parts of the work in the life cycle. So we want to reduce dependencies on security experts by teaching rather than doing the work. And so we would expect this enabling type of team to have kind of regular checkpoints with streamlined teams, because also this is not knowledge that's going to be gained in one step, right? In 2 weeks or 2 months, we're going to teach you everything there is that you need to know. That's not realistic. So it's going to, be an ongoing activity, and we're going to need regular checkpoints to understand where is this team at right now in the security domain. What do they need next? What do they need to learn and understand next? Also, very importantly, these enabling teams, in this case of security, around security, is not there to fix all the problems that the stream team has kind of incurred over time because they were not paying attention to security practices, or they didn't prioritize it correctly, or they're not looking at secure coding practices. The enabling team is not going there to fix their problems. It's going there to teach them how to fix them, right? So the user is not to give them the fish, is to teach them how to fish for themselves, right? Otherwise, we're just going to create another dependency where, on a regular basis, we're going to depend on this other team to come and fix problems for us. That's not the point here. So it's much more of a facilitating role than an execution role, if you like, for the enabling team. And we would expect this team to also have the bandwidth to stay on top of new strategies, practices, tools, frameworks, threats, etc. in the security domain. So by having a team that's dedicated to facilitate knowledge and mentor and coach and help the streamlined teams, hopefully we're also creating space for them to stay ahead of what's coming next, which is something that if across many domains we don't often make this explicit, intentional. Often it's left to the teams, to the technical teams, to just kind of sort it out by themselves, somehow find the time or in their free time to look up, what is the industry trend, what are the industry trends, what's happening, and what we should, look at next. And so it's important to build in this ability in the enabling teams at least. So just to give you an example of something that perhaps this team might look at if it's not being used yet is, if you're familiar with Gauntlet or BDD security, this kind of BDD, behavior-driven development-based frameworks to create scenarios around security that, whether we automate them or not, but at least create more awareness in the teams about what are the possible kind of threats to our application or service, and how do we address those. So perhaps this is something that enabling team could be looking at and come up with some simple examples for the streamlined teams to start using and understanding how this fits in their kind of development lifecycle. As an example. So kind of the illustration of this, if you like, is that, we might have an enabling team, perhaps it's a security team, then helping the streamlined teams, facilitating this knowledge. And kind of, if you like, a rule of thumb is, let's try to get the streamlined team to be able to do, let's say, 80% of the security work on a kind of common security work for an application. That would be already pretty good, right? So we would leave perhaps the other 20% for the experts. And so, but the way we go about to address this needs to be kind of gradual. So let's say, we want to make sure all the streamlined teams understand at least, the OWASP top 10, how to address those vulnerabilities. This is kind of too big, right? This is a lot to unpack here, and it would be hard to think about how do we go about passing all this knowledge to the streamlined teams. And so perhaps we have to be even more specific and start, think about what's the top priority, what are the things that we're regularly seeing as problems around security that our teams are not addressing, or what are some critical vulnerabilities that we might be exposing and that the team should be aware of. And so just to give you an example, and since now Kubernetes is very popular and a lot of people have highlighted, and there's been a lot of progress, but a lot of people highlighted there are many security concerns around kind of the defaults in Kubernetes. And so let's imagine we're in an organization where this is a kind of a critical concern at the moment. It's something we want to start there. And perhaps it's already kind of scope, small scope enough that we can say, okay, let's work with the streamlined team for, say, two weeks or 2 months, addressing the kind of issues and looking at how can we, improve the security around our defaults and the way we use the configurations for deployments and running services, etc. And then, once we've done that with the first team, we can move on to a second streamlined team and then a third streamlined team. So this kind of orbiting that I mentioned, where we're bringing this knowledge and we might learn new things as we're facilitating some of the teams and bring them to the next teams. And so that might be a good way to start. And once we have that kind of, okay, most of the teams or all the teams now understand what they need to do around this specific problem, then let's move on to the next thing. So that's one of the ways that we can think about applying the topologies to the security domain. Another are platform teams. So these are, in general, a platform is going to provide self-service capabilities. A modern platform will be based on self-service capabilities, APIs, or tools and artifacts that can be used by the Streamline teams without a kind of a direct dependency. And the purpose of platform is to hide kind of lower level services that we know that several Streamline teams are going to need. So they should not have to worry about things like, how do I set up my deployment pipelines, the infrastructure, the tooling, or things, or the monitoring tooling, the logging, etc. All these things that we know most of the teams or all the teams need. So can we have better abstractions in the platform so that we reduce how much the Streamline teams need to know about that? So we could think about the same for security and compliance in particular, so that we avoid this kind of the typical scenario where we have teams, we're trying to improve the flow, but then if we have these handovers where in this case these development teams have to stop, hand over the work to compliance team and wait for the response, this is definitely going to slow us down considerably. Not to mention, you can get into issues around the kind of, blaming, and then, when there are scheduling conflicts and people start pointing fingers, we're not ready because we're waiting for this other team, and the other team is overloaded and is firefighting because of problems that are coming from, poor practices. So all this that I'm sure you've seen in some organizations, hopefully not in your current organization, but this happens still a lot. And so what we're trying to say is, as much as possible, what can we move to kind of a self-service capability? So kind of ideally this compliance as a service kind of approach. Obviously it's not going to be everything, but what are the things that we can provide as a self-service capability for the Streamline teams to basically do that work themselves and check that they are compliant around whatever checks they need to do, so that what we're trying to do is keep the fast flow of change and keep the knowledge and the understanding of the compliance requirements and what the checks we need to have in place. But what we're trying to do is embed that kind of domain knowledge around compliance checks into self-service APIs or tools or whatever it might be in the platform. So once we are thinking about these two ways that we can increase the autonomy of the Streamline teams while keeping security and compliance in place, then we can also think about how the two play together, the platform and the enabling teams. And kind of a general pattern is that as we are enabling, if we are security enabling teams, helping Streamline teams understand what they need to do, we might discover some patterns where we say, actually, all the teams or several teams need to do this. If they had a platform service that would embed this kind of knowledge and make it easy to run these checks or run these security tests, whatever it might be, then we make life easier for everyone. So kind of a general sort of pattern is this, where we might have two teams collaborating or an enabling team facilitating a Streamline team around security and compliance. And then once we start to discover kind of more and more of how this service should look like, then we can push it to the platform. And here on the right, it means that it becomes kind of a X as a service kind of thing, compliance as a service. And so that helps then the teams use this and effectively, without having to actually spend as much effort in their life cycle, but just have those good practices and those checks and everything kind of embedded in their workflow. So I found this tool a few months ago. I thought it was an interesting example, going with the Kubernetes kind of example I said before. So there's this tool. I have no affiliation with it or at all, or the company. It's open source. And essentially is a command line tool to scan and identify security issues in Kubernetes deployment files, Helm charts, and deployments to Kubernetes. So it's meant to be, helping hardening security around applications and services running in Kubernetes. So one scenario, what might be happening, remember if we had this enabling team, so I'm giving you a kind of a broader picture of what's happening at a moment in time. So if we have this enabling team on the top right that is helping the Streamline team around their Kubernetes configurations to improve the security, and they might realize, oh, actually, we saw this tool and it's, let's say it's useful for us, actually meets our use cases, then we might start using it and helping the Streamline team improve their security with that. And then we realize actually this is kind of an approach that would work for many teams, for other Streamline teams. So what we're going to do is then try to push this down to the platform, as you see here. And the platform, typically we want to have a good kind of abstraction around it, where we make it even easier to use these third-party tools and services by providing a kind of a good abstraction layer. So let's imagine we call this service, KubeScan. Actually, there's a very good talk from Melanie Cibula, who works at the Airbnb infrastructure team, where they actually did something like this. They were looking at how to simplify the workflow for their development teams using Kubernetes. So they were creating services like this for deployments, for diagnosing problems with Kubernetes. So it could be something as simple as this. And so we're kind of highlighting the dynamics here, where we're saying, if we have these different topologies, so never mind the complicated subsystem at the moment, that's another topology we're not going to dig into today, but we have Streamline teams who are kind of delivering the end customer products, applications, etc. We have enabling teams helping them gain the knowledge, the capabilities that they're missing today, in particular around security. And then we're pushing kind of, as we find patterns and things that we can platformize, let's say, we push them to the platform. We have a good kind of abstraction around it, which simplifies even further by having good defaults and good kind of, the known use cases that are internal to your organization. We have them embedded, if you like, in the service as much as possible. So then other teams can start making use of that service and effectively improve their security approach, in a much more fluid way, if you like. And so this is kind of at a high level the way that team topologies can help. And if you think about kind of a more traditional siloed organization where you might have security teams as part of the life cycle on kind of more an execution role, and often kind of separated from the development teams, and there are those handovers, it's much more unlikely that you come up with a solution like this where you start having these self-service capabilities. And so hopefully this helps us rethink a little bit, going back to the beginning of this, this ratio 1 to 100, how we're going to deal with that. And in this scenario, what you see is that we need a lot less people to become the experts. We need those experts to have a much more of a mentoring, facilitating role rather than doing the work, because we know that doesn't scale well. And kind of in general, what we're trying to do with this, not just in security but other areas that I mentioned, is move from kind of these team dependencies that are in the flow of the life cycle, kind of based on execution in those handovers. Now you execute, now you do the test part, now you do the security part, and we have these handovers between different teams. We want to move away from that if we want fast flow into this kind of capability-based dependencies, where we say we have a gap here, we need help from enabling teams, from platform teams, from complicated subsystem teams, in order to have those dependencies that are out of flow. And from the security team's perspective, what we're also trying to do is push the things that are kind of the common, the known threats and the known concerns around security, push that to the Streamline teams to do, help them, but get them to have that ownership, so that the experts around security can focus on the things that are kind of the unknowns, right? And thinking about advanced threat modeling, social engineering, multi-channel customer exploits, all these things. Again, I'm not an expert, but I realize there's so much in this domain that you would want the experts to, on one hand, help the Streamline teams gain the kind of essential knowledge, and then focus their skills on the things that are kind of advanced and really require this in-depth knowledge, not on doing the running the security, the base security checks and the basic security tools, etc. That's not, that's kind of a waste of their expertise, or at least that's how I see it. And so again, the book is not specific to security, but we're trying to address, how can we improve the flow of work in organizations. And, there's obviously a lot more aspects to this, and we're talking about different topologies, different ways, different interaction modes. And then for each of these topologies, enabling platform teams, you also need to make clear the expected behaviors and interactions with others for this to work, right? It's not just telling people, well, now you're enabling the role. Probably we're going to need to help these people become better mentors, better coaches, give them actual training around that, how to be a good mentor, how to provide good training and coaching, and etc. I'm nearly done. If you want to know more, we have training online now available. And there's also a number of resources on our website, teamtopologies.com. These slides are going to be available to everyone, so you can come back to these links. Thank you for listening in my name and name of Matthew Skelton, and I'll pass it to Mario now. Just stop sharing.
Any questions so far?
No, it all made sense.
Sorry?
It all made sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me. Okay, so I read the book a lot, and I've been talking with a lot of people who have organized kind of functional teams with these team topologies in mind. And I've started trying to explore how we can apply some of these concepts to the building of security teams and how we make them interact with the organization. So let me just share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So basically, I'm in exploration mode. So what I've been trying to do is try to explore how some of these ideas can be applied. And so what I'm going to do, because Manuel didn't go into that the level of detail, but I'm assuming that not everyone will be familiar with the book or with the concepts of the interaction modes and the actual topologies. So we're just going to very quickly trying to revisit that. I'm also, because this presentation that I have now, I'm going to be asking you to put on chat your best email addresses that I can share the Google Slides with yourselves, because when we go to the final part then of this session, I'm going to ask you to create your own copies, and then we're going to do some exploration in the breakout rooms on how we can potentially apply this either to our teams or to some generic patterns that we see.
If you don't want to share your email address with everyone, you can privately send it to Mario in the chat window by selecting Mario in the to section.
And then when I get to the end of talking, then I'll share the document with everyone. So what we're going to do now is go into that. There's a suggestion. There was a suggestion by Tony Richards on the typical security teams that I've used for this purpose, and then I've created myself three different patterns that I think we can organize security teams around. And I'm going to show you what they look like with a view of pros, cons, and some heuristics for them. That's what I'm going to be the ask when we go out into break rooms, is to kind of create things with a similar type of structure. Just one thing before going into kind of more details. I agree with absolutely everything that that Manuel mentioned, but I do think that the view is very more targeted to what we would typically consider either an application security team or security engineering team. What I find, at least in my experience, is that a lot of times the idea of compliance as code and providing compliance as a service, it is the path that will allow us to scale. That's what we need to start building on. But the language that for risk management people and for compliance people to actually have these conversations in mutually supportive roadmaps is often missing, right? And so what I'm trying to do with the topologies that I'm going to present to you next is how can we potentially organize the CISO function, so the different teams within the CISO, so we can provide that clarity to the organization, right? But how do we organize the different kind of expert functions within the CISO function and to actually collaborate and provide a single view of what it means to other people? So at a high level, so streamlined teams are about the continuous flow of work, right? That are usually aligned to a business domain. So they need to have clarity of purpose, responsibility. This is what we do. This is the product or the thing that we are responsible for. So they usually have responsibility over everything from the initial requirement exploration up to the production. Another key thing here is that they may be composed of both generalists and specialists. And I think this is going to become more important when I get back to in a few minutes. So the expected behaviors of this type of team is that they've got this steady flow of feature delivery. They can correct the course very quickly, right? So they've got the feedback loops in place so they can change things when necessary. And they can learn and adapt. So they retain the ability to experiment, etc. And we always need to find ways that they don't need to hand off or minimum handoffs as necessary in order to get things in production. Right? And that is key for them for their success. With regards to the enabling teams, they will usually be composed of specialists in a given technical product domain. So in our case, there could be a security engineering team as an enabling team, as Manuel was saying. So we're going to make informed suggestions on tooling, practices, frameworks. We'll introduce practices that will allow us to have better communications, such as threat modeling, right? So it's something that we can do on a regular basis with teams to explore the potential threats that their products can potentially be exposed to. But there's a high degree of collaboration, right? So we need people that have empathy, that can have conversations and speak the same language. And this is where a lot of teams often go wrong. As Manuel was saying, it's more about guidance, right? It's not doing it for them or becoming what he calls in the book, the ivory towers of knowledge, right? That everyone then needs to come back to us asking, can we really do this, etc. It's ensuring that we're trying to empower people to actually make those decisions for themselves, right? So some of the expected behaviors for enabling teams is that they need to understand the needs of their stream-aligned teams. So that has implications in how we set up roadmap, how we acquire security products, right? We need to consider that there will be other people that will be the primary users of those capabilities. So the way we've been building budgets and the finding security transformation generally is probably not aligned to this type of operating model. Right? And that is something that the CISO function needs to come to terms with. So they may act as proxy to internal and external teams, and they need to be actively promoting learning, right? Then there is another aspect, type of topology, which is complicated subsystem. So the goal of this team is really to reduce the cognitive load of the stream-aligned teams, right? that include or use that complicated subsystem. So as you were saying, we can't expect to embed these specialists across all of the teams because it's not feasible. So going back to in highly regulated industries, for instance, we're not going to have a compliance specialist in each of the streamline teams. That doesn't make financial sense. We've got those odds 1 to 100 that we need to find ways around. So and we need to, but those decisions need to be driven by cognitive load mainly, right? So not necessarily a budget, not it's how difficult it is to do this thing properly, and how can we organize to make that easier for others to consume. So in terms of expected behaviors, this team is mindful of the current stage of development and acts accordingly. Right? So, and again, that's where most compliance and risk management teams often go wrong. Is we come in with a standard, with a best practice, and that the teams may not be ready to start consuming those best practices off the bat. Right? We need to understand where they are, what's their view of the model, how they can introduce security, and have an iterative approach on making it better, and not this is the standard that we need to be compliant with. Now go figure out how to do it, which unfortunately has been a lot of approaches, as we know, with regards to security. And the key thing about this team type is that it needs to prioritize and deliver features that respect where they are, right? So this will typically needs to understand that we need to have an initial part where we have a more collaborative nature, so we can understand what are the constraints, what are the trade-offs, what's the most effective way of doing some of these things, and then iterate from that in order to eventually be in the position to provide something like a service, right, where it's all fully defined and people can just consume it. And finally, the platform teams, it's to enable the streamline teams as much autonomy as possible. So they require strong collaboration to understand their needs, and usually you need to find ways to do fast prototyping. So, for instance, the tools that Manuel was mentioning, we can potentially, with a few different teams, have a few different tools that they test. They see what's the easiest to consume, what's the easiest for them to manage false positives as code. Those types of things, or how they can work with the tool to actually embed the practices that we're after, but having that as a collaborative thing. And again, this is not usually how security teams do. We go out and make a multi-million-dollar contract with a check marks or a Veracode or whatever flavor vendor that we want to talk about, and then we say, okay, now this is what everyone needs to do, right? And that type of approach is really not coherent with these new development patterns that require a much more mutually shaping and mutually collaborative approach to how we do security in organizations. And finally, we've got the 3 core interaction modes. So collaboration is about working closely with another team. So this is good for as a driver for innovation and rapid discovery, but this tends to blur the boundaries, right? So it's good for early exploration, but it comes at a high cognitive cost. So we should do this, but probably in security for a period of time until we develop capability, but then try to move on to other types of interaction modes. But the key behavior is high interaction and mutual respect, right? So people really need to understand that we're all rooting for the same things. We're going to have different views of the world, but what can we do that is mutually supportive? And this needs to be paired with training for collaboration, right? So things such as pair programming, such as whiteboard sketching. So the things that are collaborative in nature, the types of practices that can get people to communicate with each other, even if they don't come from the same type of background. Then the other interaction mode is around acts as a service. So consuming or providing something with minimal collaboration. So we have an API, or what they call in the book team APIs, which is kind of a similar thing, but for team services, right? Can I provide a risk management service to another team, or can I provide a compliance service to another team? What does that look like? How do we integrate that into the development lifecycle? So all of those kind of ideas, but in terms of the service, in order to define something as a service and provide it, it needs to be very well defined. It needs to have very good documentation, people need to have clear expectations of what they give and what they get back, right? So those are all things that are required to be in place if we're going to treat something as a service. And my experience at least tells me that a lot of security teams try to approach the services they provide to the rest of the organization as acts as a service, but they haven't built the mutual understanding and don't have the type of documentation and approaches that are coherent to that type of service. Right? So we didn't do a collaboration phase, we didn't do a facilitation phase. So we are working on many assumptions of how people can or cannot consume our service that may not align with everyone else's understanding of what they give and what they get. And finally, we've got, sorry, in this Acts as a service, the emphasis is really on user experience in training for the user and developer experience, right? So, and those are the kind of the key ideas. Until we are in a space where we can do that emphasis on how people are going to use our services, I don't think we should be trying to go down that route. There are other things we need to do first to kind of clean up the house before we're at a stage where that can be done effectively. And finally, we've got a facilitating, which is helping or being helped by another team to clear the impediments. So this is about reducing gaps in capabilities. So for instance, the threat modeling as a service that we provide, the helping developers wrap our security tests in Jenkins libraries so that people can use across the different projects. That pattern that Manuel was talking about, of first developing a capability, working with the Streamline team, then pushing that out to platform. Right. So the pushing out to platform is where we could potentially think about wrapping some of these tests in libraries that people can easily use without even having to know which tools they're actually using. Right. At that point, they don't care about it. They just care that their dependencies are checked. They don't care what's the tool that we're using to do that, right? That's something that we can then take the cognitive load off of the teams that are consuming that service. Right, so in the key team behavior here is facilitation techniques, right? So running workshops, for instance, in facilitating, so anything that we can learn ourselves as security professionals to facilitate this type of transfer of knowledge and to get help from others. Any questions on that? And actually, Manuel, did I say something really stupid, by the way?
No, you were on point. Yep. Very good.
Okay, good. But any questions at this point? No? Okay. So let's move on then. So following the Tony Richards conversations we had on the OSS Slack, this is kind of some of the functions that that he uses on how security teams are typically organized. So we've got the coordination function, so someone that is responsible for the security program management, people dealing with information risk, dealing with operational security, dealing with security architecture, with AppSec or security engineering, with security testing, with audit and assurance. So I would put compliance typically here as well. And finally on security culture, so security awareness and all those other things. So just for to see if as part of OSS, if we could get more of a development or agreement on these types of teams, what I've done on these slides was to add some words around what each of these teams would be typically responsible for, or the things that they would be looking into doing. So coordination more about metrics, security project management, information risk, it's more about the assessment and analysis, risk reporting, things such as cyber insurance or third-party vendor risk management, so vendor assurance, etc. Operational security is kind of a bucket where everything fits almost. It doesn't fit in the other ones. So everything around logging and monitoring, vulnerability assessment, incident response, forensic, threat intelligence, and dealing with the insider threat. So security architecture, it's more about the architecture, business continuity and disaster recovery, and more program management. So working closely with coordination as the people behind that are driving the things that security architecture needs to do. So coordination more of a function to manage the plan, in security architecture being the function that actually develops the plan, that helps identify what the needs are. Then we've got application security or security engineering. So this would be more about a specific system, developing the plan for security for a system, identity and access management, security baseline configuration. So establishing a baseline that we can work with stream-aligned teams or push down to platform on the types of services that they consume. And again, this part I think is key on security engineering, exactly to reduce cognitive load and the expected expertise that everyone in the organization needs to have. And then integrating some of these tests into CI/CD, and also what I like to call targeted awareness, right? So not the yearly plan that you need to do for compliance purposes on the general security awareness stuff, but what does that actually mean to the team, to the scope of the things that they produce? What are the biggest threats to product X as opposed to product Y? Or what are the things that are specific to platform security that they need to, that a good platform person needs to know about, right? So this is kind of targeted awareness. So what it means to people in their own context. And then security testing, more the internal and external penetration testing, etc. So this has a bit of overlap with CI/CD integrated tests. So depending on the organization, this doesn't fit neatly into different boxes. Then on audit and assurance about the security policy, general compliance, the control assessments, control framework compliance, and audit liaison. So planning and preparing the audits and taking care of the auditors when they're in. And finally, security culture. So end user security awareness, publishing the different policies, potentially phishing programs or exec board education even, or any advanced reporting that we may need for internally to talk about the need for security across the organization, right? So that type of thing. So there are obviously different ways that we can think about security teams. I just thought it would be important to get to start developing, see if we can develop something as Open Security Summit that we can use as the baseline to talk about team structures and team topologies. So now we are going to talk about 3 patterns that I've developed. I'm probably going to talk about 2 only and skip one of them in the interest of time. So this is using the ideas. This isn't very pretty, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure this can be made much prettier. But the idea is that we've got X as a service, collaboration and facilitating. And these are all slides that you're going to then be able to change. But the idea being here that CISO function with security engineering, this for me is one of my, I would say, preferred types of patterns because it treats information risk and compliance, audit and assurance as a separate stream-aligned team for the reason that they may not have the vocabulary developed enough to have meaningful conversations with the stream-aligned or the platform teams that will typically be of a much more technical nature. So this security engineering and security architecture in this pattern effectively have the role of boundary spanners, right? They understand security, they understand technical, and they do this mediation of concerns between the different types of teams. So here we've got the team would need to collaborate between information risk and assurance. They would have a more providing of architecture type services, the security architecture team to the stream-aligned platform teams, and then a more facilitating type of approach from security engineering back to stream-aligned and the platform teams. Right? So this is where we would do the practices such as the threat modeling, such as developing some tests to integrate into CI/CD, so those kinds of things. And acts as a service from an OPSEC and testing perspective, right? Testing more kind of external, not so much the integrated parts. And this is where, because it's provided as a service, in terms of operational security, even though security engineering and OPSEC could a bit serve as the gatekeepers for security overall, there would be an expectation that these needs are sufficiently determined or documented that someone can can have kind of a checklist approach. Have you done this? Have you done that? Right. Also, in order um, to enable this type of service being provided. Another thing that neither myself or Manuel mentioned, but I think is also part of the book and of high importance, is that having all of the security teams be facing many different teams in the organization is usually the wrong thing to do, because due to the Dunbar number, etc., you can only build trust up to a certain number of people. The more you dilute that across different teams, not only the more difficult it will become for people to trust each other, but when you don't have that shared language, it becomes even harder, right? So having that consideration of having a few key people that build trust is going to help not only filter the work and make sure that we are having mutually supportive roadmaps, but also on the other hand, help build that trust so that security is taken better, more seriously, let's say. So in this pattern, we also relies on having this high collaboration between the engineering team in information risk and audit. Right. So we're going to need to be, we are doing these technical controls because of these risks or these compliance standards. Right. But we, in this pattern, we keep that level of detail on the wider risk analysis outside of the things that we do directly with the teams. Right. And we can have more detailed conversations. Look, this is what it means to you. Let's threat model the concern that was highlighted by the risk analysis, and not let's bring you to the risk analysis process because they work fundamentally differently in terms of their different time spans. And usually engineers and developers, they like to understand what they can do in the next few sprints, so in the next few months at best. They don't like when you say, I think that a data breach happens once every 7 years, blah, blah, and these are all the hypothetical scenarios that may never happen or what could happen, right? Engineers like to specify things, and the risk analysis works at a different type of a frame. It's not that they shouldn't be, so the role here is these security engineers need to bridge that gap between those higher stories under uncertainty and those things that can be done with threat modeling of what we can do here and now to help manage that risk. But serving as kind of, as I mentioned, the boundary spanners between both those. So there are some pros and cons on this approach, and this is the type of format that I'd like us to think about when we go into the break rooms, which is the pros of this pattern, I think, is that a security engineering provides this facilitation and boundary spanning between technical domains and others. OPSEC and testing provide services that reduce cognitive load on the teams. So audit and risk teams don't typically engage with value team and platform teams as they operate in different time span, as I mentioned, sprints with specifications versus multi-year cycles with uncertainty. The cons of this is that the security engineers need to have a clear understanding of risk management and audit requirements, so they direct the work that they do in the facilitation with the teams to actually develop the mitigations that relate to the compliance of the risks that were identified. OPSEC may work on assumptions, right? If they don't have that level of collaboration or facilitation, there may seem assumptions that we need to ensure that there aren't many or that they are the right ones. Audit in this pattern, audit and risk may become further disconnected from the operational realities. So that may not be a good thing, but a risk that we need to manage. And this would require a clear alignment in terms of practices between what is done at the risk analysis and risk mitigation plan level, usually at the VP or director level in the organization, and what that means to the threats that we are in the development process trying to find and coming up with mitigations against. So this, in terms of heuristics, this is where AppSec and security engineering need to have people who are skilled at technical risk management as well, and process assurance. Right? So it's not just about putting in the clever tool that is going to tell us if we're secure or not. It's also about let's look at the processes on how people actually do things, and do we have everything in place to make it happen. Right? So not just technical stuff, it's how are we doing peer reviews, how effective are our peer reviews, and that type of when people make requests, how do they get feedback on if they've done something right or wrong? What types of tests do we do after every commit, as opposed to how many tests do we do on a full QA environment where we may have a few hours, a few days instead to do security testing. So all those things need to, security engineers need to understand how to do with this pattern. So culture and awareness, a team need to be party to forums between risk audit and security engineering as a hedge to consider impact of culture on a wider place, let's say. In security engineering should front the requirements for application security and application and testing, right? Potentially checklist oriented. So I'm going to miss that other one. I'm just going to talk about another scenario that this is something that I'm developing for a customer that I'm working with at the moment. In that they they come from a highly regulated industry. So I think this could be helpful for instance, in the medical space and also for banking, for instance, or the highly regulated industries. So here we treat information risk and audit and assurance as a complicated subsystem, right? And this doesn't become your typical risk and your risk and compliance team. This actually needs to have people that know how to code, they know how to develop compliance as code tests, and they've got all of those capabilities that they can then provide to the other teams. So in this instance, we've got this team provides a service to security engineering. So they help them with developing a lot of the tests, but they may not be technical enough to actually understand the design patterns, etc. So we still have a security engineering function doing all that day-to-day type work with the teams. But we understand that risk and compliance is so important for this organization that they develop a lot of the automated compliance checks that the other teams can then integrate into their practices. Right? So this needs to be a multi-skilled team. And here, this team keeps on doing the facilitating, and these teams at first need to start in a highly collaborative fashion, right? So they need to really understand, so for this product, what are the risks and the compliance requirements that you have? This will typically involve the effective use of metadata on doing some of these tests. So it's not just about, for instance, checking the cookies, the security of cookies in a particular website. It's about, okay, I've checked the security of cookies, and I know that this check relates to the compliance standards ASVS 14.2. It relates to the medical device regulation, blah, blah, into the other, whatever security standards or compliance standards the organization needs to be compliant with. It's also about using metadata effectively to get these tests to tell the compliance process, this is our validation, right? As opposed to then considering compliance in these industries as a once-a-year type of exercise that then leaves you with a whole year or multiple years worth of work to do, and you're always reliant on people manually checking things that they may or may not understand, to actually make this work for everyone, right?
I have a
Making it easy to consume. Yep.
So some regulations, let's say regulations, require to have governance structure that are the first line and second line should be very separate. You shouldn't be checking your own work and stuff. But in your CISO functions, it looks like they are together. The first line and second line are both under the CISO function.
I would disagree.
Okay.
So in this pattern, that's why we would have, yeah. So that's the first line would always be the stream-aligned and platform teams, and they would be supported by the security engineering function, right? So that's where the kind of the facilitation would happen. What this team is, what this complicated subsystem is doing is automating their compliance process, their auditing process. Right. So they are still developing those. You still have that second line. The difference is that they're not just developing some empty Word documents in the Excel spreadsheets that people are expected to know about. They're actually developing those artifacts as code that can be integrated into the development practice. Right.
Okay, and how does the CISO stay out of trouble if a regulator asks? So you seem to be doing both first line and second line.
No, It's not, they're not doing both, right? They're exposing their requirements as code as opposed to some Word documents, right? They're doing the exact same thing. They're just being much more effective.
Okay, so there is actual first line teams who are
Yep.
actually doing the job.
Yep. So the first line teams are always the people doing the work, right? So streamlined and platform.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do is then informed by the facilitation that they have with the security engineering team. Right? It's how to integrate security into their practices. The second line would always be the information risk and compliance part. The difference is that one is that they're not just developing out of context type things on Word documents. They're actually developing the automated tests that people can integrate into the process.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome. So this is something that I think is one of the ways that we can potentially think about using security, compliance, and risk as a complicated subsystem. So the pros are that, well, you really need to bring a multi-skill team in order to do this. So you need to have people that are skilled at audit, risk, and you will probably need some QA engineers or software developers to help build all of these artifacts that can be leveraged by different teams. You also reduce cognitive load by all of the other teams that have a stake. So at this point in time, you no longer need to be beating your streamline teams or platform teams with, these are all my compliance requirements and what you need to do about them. You can actually give them tests and say, okay, now you can self-serve these tests and see how compliant you are, right? And that acts as a communication tool and not just a compliance or governance thing. And this is a simpler structure, a team structure, but you do need to have these holistic skills in clear interaction modes. The cons is that the team dynamics within this complicated subsystem team is going to need to be really worked on, right? Because you're going to be putting together people that you're going to have some people that are specialists in QA or software development, people that are used to working more in a risk and compliance way, so maybe more oriented to spreadsheets and box ticking, that type of thing. And then how to integrate all of these things may not be self-explanatory, right? So the dynamics within this team on who, in making sure that you can hear from everyone and that everyone has a chance to say, this is not going to work for our teams because X, Y, or Z, or we really need to do this or find a different way to do it. That team dynamic is going to have to be really worked on, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work. And then it's about the heuristics. So if you've got to need to be compliant with multiple standards or regulatory requirements that have a direct impact on software development, if you've got existing challenges and tensions between the typical gatekeeping profiles and the engineering teams, and if you've got currently limited assurances that are provided directly by the process and the automation of these validations, these are, I think, some heuristics that you can use. Yeah, maybe I should be, even if for a period, treat this as a complicated subsystem and get different from people, different parts, actually building the assurances into the processes that are done. So these are kind of explorations of applying this knowledge from Manuel and Matthew's book that I've been doing on. Any questions for me now? Or any comments, not just questions? Anyone would like to share some? Do you think I'm completely mad?
You imagine, guys, if you were in a room together, we would be, there would be more voices than just one. So don't feel shy, please.
It's probably a lot of information at once. But I think it would be interesting to hear if anyone has in the organization's done something similar in any way of kind of getting teams to work in this more of enabling role rather than being the the sole experts around some of these domains.
I think in our team we've tried a lot of times to do it in this kind of cooperative way. But we're not solely as InfoSec team enablers. We have also this year SRE team being our enablers, and the kind of teams get mixed, like in regards to these roles. For example, we're trying to introduce a lot of automation in security, and the SRE team has helped us a lot to get through that. And it's actually, initially it's kind of hard to get developers and everyone working on this with you, because a lot of times people think it's just purely a security role to do it. So if you have any advice how to try and motivate and get people to help each other in this way, I also appreciate advice in that perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. So, and actually this type of enabling role and team, one of the hard things is that it's very unfamiliar, both for the people in the team, often having to kind of facilitate and mentor rather than just doing the work is unfamiliar, and it's also often unfamiliar for managers and people outside those teams, who might look at it as, if these people are kind of our security InfoSec experts, why are they not doing the work rather than helping others? And so
yeah, exactly.
That's definitely complicated. I think there's no kind of silver bullet, other than like you said, sounds like you've started to do it and you start to show the value. And I think, or I like to believe, that even the teams who are further away from security, if you have development teams who have not really been worried about security, if they feel like, okay, I'm able to do this now with the help of enabling and platform and complicated subsystem teams, if I'm able to do more of this, then I actually will feel like I have more autonomy, that I don't depend as much on other people to do this for me. But again, it depends a lot also, even inside the same organization, you might have teams which are even their mindset might be much further ahead than other teams. So I would say, if you're starting, look inside the organization, which are the teams that are more prone to understand what you're trying to do and get that collaboration going. Essentially, and to managers, you can kind of sell it as a pilot, which tends to work. It's just a pilot. Let's try this, and then when people start to see the benefits, then typically other teams start to get on board. But I agree, it's not easy.
I think models like SRE make this much easier, right? Because you already have a role that is dedicated into this boundary spanning, right? So the SRE team will be worried about quality, will be worried about performance, will be worried about security. They will have already that type of role that tries to bring in the different disciplines into a coherent role. So usually when you already have an SRE team, things should be easier compared to other teams that may have an approach in the team structure for security that is mostly kind of compliance and risk focused. That's when you've got much more barriers and challenges in communication.
SRE as an enabler to enabling teams.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely agree with that. I think without them, this task would be much harder.
Yeah.
And yes, I think it's a good idea to maybe try and sell it as a pilot. Also, something that we have just started, so we're keen to see the results of this, is doing the Security Champions program, where we have, like in different teams, we have security champions, and we're going to try and get them to help us, enable all of this. They will be kind of the mediators of the whole process. So it will be fun to find out how that works.
I really like the idea of Security Champions program. One thing that is often missed is will they actually be able to spend time on security things, and is that aligned to what the product owner expects them to be doing, right? When I find that usually the incentives and the bandwidth, let's say, for them to actually do a lot of the things they would like to do isn't necessarily there. Right?
Yeah, true, true. And we don't know how much we can ask from them because we don't know what their capabilities are of, you know, dedicating their time to this. So yeah,
Yep.
it's going to be a process.
Right. So I've shared with the 3 people that sent over their email addresses. I've shared the slides with them. If anyone else wants me to share these slides on the security patterns, please tell me, either on the wider channel or on private. What was going to be my the next part would be to first to go into breakout rooms and have a conversation about them. Either if you know people already on the call and you want to talk about a specific thing on how to apply this to your context, or if we want to go into random created groups and think about either some of the patterns that I've already mentioned or some of the other ones that I thought about. So what does that mean when we've got an InfoSec team with a QA department or with an SRE team? How would that change in terms of the modes of collaboration? And even what happens with when we don't have security engineering capabilities, which happens in a lot of organizations that I work with. So if you're missing that, how can we have this type of collaboration, or what would how would that our team structure or our team topology changed as a result of that?
So I have created the breakout rooms.
Okay, how many?
There are 3 rooms.
Okay.
With 5 people in each, and you and Manuel, you guys can jump into different rooms. I will stay in the main room, so if any to monitor if anybody's need any support. So for each of these rooms, you will need at least 1 person to have the slides, right?
Yep, exactly.
So can you tell me the 3 people's names?
So it was Petra.
Okay.
It was Jonathan.
Okay.
Gavin.
Gavin.
And Harry.
Okay, I do not have the last 2 people's names, so I will move you to the room that I'm not sure if somebody has the slides. So we now have 4 people in each room. Really?
So if someone doesn't have the slides, just ping me on chat and I'll share if no one on a particular group has them.
Somebody wants to say something? Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm gonna join a second time because I'm on my iPad at the moment. So if you could put me and the second me into the shared room, that'll mean I can share. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, the rooms are now open. Please join your rooms.
We'll come back in about 10-15 minutes.
Yes, and is everyone clear of what they are going to be doing? If anybody isn't, just stay here and Mario or Manuel will help you.
So in the example you were talking about, there isn't are you the security person or part of the security team?
Yeah, right now I'm head of security and infrastructure, so I'm leading the security team, which is of course in a company a small size, very limited, and the DevOps and infrastructure team. So like you mentioned before, a ratio of 1 to 10, so it's easier to scale if you can somehow lead the DevOps infrastructure team also from a security point of view, and also you can somehow provide more guidelines and direction in terms of security.
Actually, I wanted to remove this one. Yeah, so there was kind of the this is more the internal security things that I ended up not talking about due to time. But I think that generally it could be kind of a combination of this type of topology, right? Where not necessarily, let me duplicate this one. So you wouldn't necessarily have a security architecture function as per se, right? But it would be more on this side where there would be the facilitation in terms of those other parts.
Yeah, we also have I have to say, a very good engineering lead. So we're forcing best practices in terms of security engineering with technical design, especially for certain features. So we're basically having security reviewing everything that is being every feature before it's actually being developed. So this helps a little bit with scaling because at least there is a quality gate. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. How in that type of scenario, in the information from risk and audit, they come as the usual. My experience is that in all organizations that I've worked with, they usually come in spreadsheets that you get. These are kind of the non-functional requirements, and then you've got a list of 1,500 things that they expect to be done at all times.
Well, it depends. I experienced that internally in bigger corporates.
Yep.
In our case, let's say we have so requirements in terms of also in the technical design, what is required. We also involve compliance and let's say GRC in general.
Yeah.
But it is not so. Let's say it's much more formal, where we have requirements from external auditors or from let's say authorities and so on. So in that case, it's much more structured in general.
Yep. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm about to I'll be starting work with another customer soon, which is also it's a fintech company, and it's going to be exactly that. So I'm going to be using the ideas from Team Topologies to try to stick. So the objective will be to try to stick to the 1 to 100, right? As a general thing. So how can we doing the facilitation to help start doing things such as threat modeling, such as helping them help working with the platform teams to embed some of the security tests in libraries that they can reuse then across multiple projects, and doing that work so they can kind of push to them to the teams what they can self-serve, so that then I can have more bandwidth to deal with just more of the compliance stuff, etc.
Yeah.
A key part of the strategy will be on ensuring that we add metadata to all of the tests and all the things that they do, so that we can then they run a pipeline and I can get from the outputs. Okay, this was in relation to functional requirement X, non-functional requirement whatever, or the risks that relate to risk number 13 and the risk register, whatever may be the case, right? So making that effective use of metadata to help inform the system. So any suggestions here on so this kind of approach on either the pros and cons that you see with this type of approach on this kind of mediation between them?
Well, I personally, well, as I mentioned, the more you get, the more you formalize with the requirement, especially in terms of team size, the more it becomes a problem for smaller teams, right?
Yep.
So that is one of the biggest limitation. So, yeah. But so another aspect is like when you have a smaller company, they need to do higher compliance compared to other startups. So of course, then you have this this layer 1, layer 2 separation that also doesn't help to scale. It makes things even more complex. Yeah, but yeah. So it's I think the company size and the ratio that you mentioned is one of the most interesting aspects of it.
So I think that also relates to the problem is not, actually this is kind of picking up on
Okay, welcome back.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello. How did it go?
It was good. It was
Sure.
just me and Manuel.
Wow, one-on-one consultation. That's expensive. Usually.
Yeah, exactly. Lucky me, lucky me.
Okay, so do we do like quick roundup of each session, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, would be good. So at least in the room that we were in, we ended up not developing further. It was also probably not enough time, but we had a more in-depth conversation about some of these models, how they apply to some the teams that people were part of, and how that relates to some of these patterns and how to apply them. So it was a good conversation around the topic, though we didn't actually produce a new deliverable, let's say.
Okay.
Well, me and Manuel produced something.
Nice.
Do you guys want to share, or
Sure, sure. I can share my screen. Okay. So we picked this sample.
Yep.
And we started off with this, but then we kind of moved it a little bit. So we were talking about how this would work in like a smaller company where there's not such a big division between, you know, the AppSec team, the information risk team, when there's not much division between these teams, where kind of the InfoSec team covers a lot of it. So we started off with this where it would be like a separate complicated entity, the information risk. But then we aligned it to the InfoSec team. But then we realized that actually the InfoSec team and this whole thing can be actually part of the platform, because we took an example, which was the AWS benchmark, where, for example, in order to create some, enable some security standards, you can actually automate it a lot by using something like Boto3 and Python. So in that perspective, the InfoSec team, which is ensuring these standards, is also the team who's going to be writing these scripts and kind of providing the platform for it. And then while you have still the Streamline team, which will be providing the product and the deliverables to the customers. And then we also said the enabling team here would again be the InfoSec team, which would contain again because it's a small company, so the security engineering AppSec team would all be part of the InfoSec team. And then we would have the SRE team here also, like we discussed earlier, who would be kind of the cross enablers of the whole thing, and enabling, with knowledge and mentoring both teams and kind of connecting the dots. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Have I missed anything, Manuel?
I think that's pretty good. We were making the point that if you have kind of small organization, typically this is going to be a little bit harder on that team that is the InfoSec team, because they're going to have to switch between collaborating with the Streamline teams to understand how they can help provide a service that is helpful. And they were using the example of the AWS benchmark. And then at some other points in time, they have to be facilitating. So they have to switch between developing this service or kind of layer on top of it and facilitating the knowledge for the stream teams to understand how to use it and what are the practices around it. So it will be challenging for kind of small organization, but if you can get that going, it can be quite helpful that same people are able to develop good embed the knowledge in these services and also facilitate knowledge.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
how about the third room? Okay, that's not very promising.
Was that the one that
You were in, yes.
I was it? Okay, yeah. So we talked around a little bit around some of the pros and cons of where the security engineering org sits. Does it historically, does it sit with product engineering or does it sit with the CISO? And some of the differences of a sort of smaller company versus bigger company and how that works for risk. I think that is the rough summary. Please, anyone else who is in the room, correct me if I've missed anything.
No, that was about it. Unfortunately, we didn't get very far.
That's a great conversation to have.
Yeah, big subject. Lots of things to think about.
Right. So we are in the last 11 minutes. I should remind our organizers and the note taker to think about the outcomes document.
Yep.
And how we're gonna shape it. And from the audience, do you think there is something we must include so that we don't miss it?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
So from this session, this whole session, so we will have your slides and everything, but in the outcome documents, is there something that is a must to include? So we should not miss this, something like that.
I don't think so. So I was keeping some notes on whilst Manuel was talking about. Obviously, when I was talking about, I couldn't, but I'll add them some of those later on what was discussed. In terms of for me, the reason why I wanted to have this this session at the Open Security Summit, and gladly Manuel could be part of it as well, was for us as a security industry to start talking about some more deliberate design patterns, and also stop thinking about team structures from a static point of view, but think about its evolution. Right. So those slides, I'd like to then make them available for not only for everyone, but also one of the outcomes that I'll talk with you separately, but I'd like to create a GitHub page that we get some of these. So the first few slides that I've added, such as the basics of the 4 types of team topologies and the 3 interaction modes, and hopefully start getting more collaboration to actually keep on developing some of these patterns. That
is great, and we can point to that GitHub repo from the summit page for this session, which is a fair. I think some other people will also use the same methodology because it's easier collaboration that way. Cool, and I think you have summarized it quite well in the last 2 minutes. But I was going to ask for a debrief, like 2-3 minutes debrief, but I think you have summarized it pretty well. Do you have any last words, Manuel?
No, just thank you for having me. I would be happy to continue. I hope this discussion continues on GitHub repo, or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, whatever you prefer. So I think it's useful, and again, there are no silver bullets here, but like Mario said, I think the first step is to move away from this static kind of siloed idea of this team is always responsible for this and this is always responsible for that, and the idea of team topology is kind of to start an evolution. And as we've seen, there are many factors. Depends how big is your organization, how regulated is your industry, how mature your kind of development teams are. But so I think the first step is to kind of have a picture of where we are now as an organization, so we can then take steps. But I think it's very useful to discuss, different approaches, and I hope that's what will happen.
And that's what you have started. So thank you so much. It's really good to have some people from outside of the security to provide a perspective. Definitely. Any questions, comments from the audience?
Thank you. Great session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I can.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. And thanks for contributing a lot. I will stop the recording now.